One of the privileges that we get to have in ministry is helping people prepare for marriage. And so, if you marry people or plan on doing it in the future, you will undoubtedly go through premarital counseling with people in your congregation. And so, today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 5 premarital counseling tips.
Thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. My name is Brian Androsian, and his name is Dylan Dodson. And today we're going to give you 5 premarital counseling tips.
Yep, we're talking about premarriage counseling. You might have done it in the past, or you might be doing it in the future.
Yep.
If you're marrying people, just really highly practical. It's kind of like when we talk about preaching. There's a lot of different ways to do it. Just thought it might be helpful to hear how one way to do it, and you can take and leave whatever you want.
Mm-hmm.
But particularly in church planting, if you haven't done it yet, and you're like, I don't even know where to start, how to do it, hopefully this can be helpful.
At least a starting point.
Yep. And also, as we say this a lot of times in these episodes, if you got questions about anything we talk about in this episode, if you go to our Facebook group, Practical Church Planting, you can drop the questions there and we can answer them, or anyone else can answer them.
Yep.
Right there. So here we go. The first tip here is what I use. You can use a lot of things. You can use books, resources. I use something called the Pre-Marriage Course by Alpha. Now, many of you might be familiar with Alpha because they do that discipleship training or whatever. They also do marriage counseling. Or not marriage counseling, but they have material for it.
Resources.
Now they have a marriage course, and they also have a pre-marriage course. And how you can do it is you can actually do this with multiple couples at a time. It's not how Christina, my wife, and I do it, but you could do it and schedule them throughout. There's 6 sessions or 5 sessions, whatever, and you can schedule it for your community. I guess if you're a big church, that would work. If you're a small church, I'm not sure how that would work. Yeah. We just use that, but we don't do a course for everybody. We just do it for the individual couple. And basically how it works, it's if you go to themarriagecourse.com, that's how you can find it. And then you just click on the pre-marriage course, not the marriage course. But themarriagecourse.com is with Alpha. I really like it because they don't have to read anything, and people don't always like to read. Instead, they watch videos and discuss it. I feel like it's much more likely that it's going to happen.
Yeah.
And so basically how it works is there is I forget the number. It's 200 something questionnaire that they fill out. Each couple fills out individually, and it's super helpful because the reason I like it is it's either agree, disagree, or unsure. I think there's 3 answers for each of them, and if they get the answer quote unquote wrong on the answers next to it, it'll tell you what you should ask. It'll say here's what they should have said. So if they gave different answers, or they both agreed with something that they should have disagreed with, or I forget the 3, whatever. If they give the answer that's wrong, for example, I'm not sure this is one of the questions, but when you have kids, they are more important than your spouse. Let's say they both agree with that. Well, that's not a good thing.
Yeah.
And so, especially when you're starting out, it gives you you should ask questions. That's not how Christine and I do it now. We just take the questions that because it kind of highlights them if they're quote unquote wrong, or if they give different answers. So you don't have to read all of their answers.
Yeah.
We just make a Google sheet, and what we do is we talk through the answers that they gave different answers or maybe questions that were not the best answered. And we have a Google sheet. The first time we meet, there's different ways to do this. You could break it up into 6 sessions, or you can combine some of them, which is what we typically do. The first time we meet, Christine and I go through the questions that they differed on, or whatever. We typically don't get through all of them, and so we keep the Google sheet, and for all the other sessions, we'll do a question or 2 till we get through the end of it. It's different for different people. What we try to do is Christina tries to be at the first session and the 4th session, because the 4th session is the one where they talk about sex. It's not just intimacy, but that's part of it, and so I just think it's really helpful to have the man and a woman, not just a man there. And then she might be at the other ones. She might not be. Yeah. It just depends. But anyway, there's 5. So there's the questionnaire, and then there's 5 videos. And with the video, there's a workbook that you can buy, or you can just print out the workbook as well. And they watch each of the sessions, each of the videos, and they do the assignment with the videos. And then they come and we talk about each session each time we meet. Sometimes we have to combine it for time's sake, or whatever. There's a lot going on, and so we might do 2 sessions at once, and so that you don't have to meet them with them 6 times. You can get down to 5. But that's how we do it, and we just let them do the work, talk through it. The video is really helpful. They talk through a lot of great stuff, and so it gives them a lot of things to think through. The video is about an hour in length each time, but again, because you're not reading, it's I feel a little more engaging, and they're a lot more likely to do it.
Yeah.
But that's how they do it. The premarital counseling. What I'm trying to say, pre-marriage course.
Yeah.
For the marriagecourse.com. We do the questionnaire by itself, and then we do each session, each video session on its own.
So to make this super hyper practical, especially if there's someone who's going into church planning and hasn't done marriage
Yep.
counseling yet and I'm it's kind of you weren't prepped for this question, so I don't know if you have an answer or not. And if you don't, that's cool. But as you've like done this with couples and gone through these questionnaires, have there been specific ones that you can think of that have come up more often as issues that need to be addressed than others?
Um, no, not really, because there's so many of the questions that they're always different.
Okay.
And honestly, there's just some couples are a lot more spiritually mature,
Mhm.
or just mature, or are really healthy, and some people are not as healthy. And so the nice thing about especially the questionnaires is very personalized, and even the sessions are very personalized because they give us a workbook and they have to answer them like together.
Yeah.
And so it really reveals a lot of stuff instead of you trying to do all the work. Um, for them. So basically what we do is the first session, like the questionnaire, we don't come with any pre-questions. Christine and I look at the questions before they come, and we make a Google Doc of all the ones that we want to address. And we've done this enough that we've kind of, you get better at it.
Yeah.
And so we bold the questions that we definitely want to ask, because we don't, if some of their questions are not the same answer, we don't go over every single one of them, especially knowing that a lot of them are going to be covered. But if it's like really important, then we'll bold it to make sure we go over it. And yeah, so it's just really customizable, really, to each couple is a lot different.
Yeah,
So
that's good. I mean, there's a lot. Obviously, I'm sure there's a million resources out there, but
I want to say
I think that-
this resource is free.
okay. Well, that was actually my next
they
question.
have to
so
pay
that's
for
good.
the book,
Yeah.
but this is totally free, so you don't have to pay for anything. The sessions are free.
That's really good. And it sounds like, especially for a free resource, that it comes with a lot of, like, there's a lot more to it than probably a lot of other
Yeah,
free
so
resources.
so they buy the book. I would, if you're going to use this, I would buy the book yourself so that you can have it when you're talking through questions with them. But then we take a Google Doc. We also have a Google Doc, so we do this the same every time of like the main questions we ask from each session. Some of them are from the book and some of them are just our own. And so we really just ask the same questions each time.
Yep.
And of course they go in different directions, but we've kind of figured out here are the kind of the main things we want to make sure we address. And that's how it works. We have like a little sheet for us every time. So we're not like wondering, what should we talk about?
Yeah. Cool. So that's themarriagecourse.com.
Yep, the pre-marriage course by Alpha, marriagecourse.com. It's free. Again, you have to create like a course and you have to like create a location and a meeting time, but it doesn't matter. You just set it up so you can get access to the videos and then send in the videos and watch them one at a time.
Cool.
So that's what we use. Here's a second tip: is set expectations up front. So how many meetings there will be, who will be there, when you're starting, when you need to end by. It's just always clear. If you and your spouse are going to be at all of them or not at all of them, I would say that up front. Set the expectation lower and let them be pleasantly surprised. Just from our experience, my wife works for a marriage ministry called Awesome Marriage, awesomemarriage.com. It's like an online thing. So she really loves to do this and she wants to be at all of them. And, but it's just not practical for us. And so what will happen is if you say, well, I'm going to try to be at all of them. And then, she's only there for half of them. People can kind of feel like, even though you're doing this for free, they kind of feel like, oh, we missed out.
Yeah.
But if we're clear on the front end that Christina is probably only going to be here for 2, and if we happen to be able to schedule it at other times, then they're like, yay.
Yeah.
But we had one where we said she was going to be at all of them, and then we had to do 4 at once, which I've talked about, and so she had to miss like the last one for one of the couples, and they were kind of like, oh, bummer. And it's like, well, if we hadn't promised, we didn't promise it, but they would have been fine with it. So all I say, set expectations, how's going to be there. Again, I know schedules and jobs are different, but I would recommend you and your spouse, if you're the guy, or if you're a girl leading it. I mean, you just want to have both people at some point, so they can have questions, particularly when you talk about intimacy. And not everything maybe feel comfortable sharing, but like it's just you need both perspectives, and so it's really helpful to try to do that. But obviously, you don't have to do it for all of them. Again, how many meetings? If you've got a lot going on or whatever, and basically you've done this, regardless of what premarital stuff you do, tell them up front how many it's going to be so that they can plan. When you're going to start, when you're going to end. I mean, if someone is getting married in 9 months, maybe you don't want to start right away. You might want to wait a couple months till it gets a little closer or whatever. Just all the expectations that you want to set, you should proactively set them so that people will do whatever you say. But if you're like kind of wishy-washy and then change your mind, they might kind of feel disappointed. Whereas if you would just like said, here's what we're going to do. So obviously you got to work with people's schedules, but remember, if they're asking you to do this, you don't need to bend over backwards because you have to stay healthy. We've talked about this in a lot of episodes. You've got to have a schedule. You've got to do and people will. One of the things I've learned, the newer you are in planting, is you feel like you got to meet people whenever it's good for them. But if they're asking to meet, people are flexible. People will make it happen. And so if it's in the morning, if it's during the day, there's times where people have to come off work early to meet with me during the day because their wedding's coming up and they want to get this in, and this is the time that works. And
Yeah.
so obviously you want to work with them as best you can, but you don't want to be unhealthy. And so set expectations up front of what this is going to look like.
And that's like the key to avoiding conflict in
Yeah.
anything, really. Like because if everyone's clear on what's going to happen up front, then there's very little like room for error, kind of,
Yeah.
And I think that even allows you to be almost allows you to be more flexible with them if you're clear up front on the expectations. Because if you're telling them up front, hey, I can only whatever it is, we can do this once a week, and these are the couple times I'm available. Then they have the opportunity to say, if maybe they have a very rigid schedule that they can't get out of, I can't do those with this other time work. Where if you're more wishy-washy and kind of doing it more week to week, or if you are kind of flaky on them, then that would be a lot more difficult for even like the kind of the understandable times where you need to reschedule or need to kind of work with their schedule a little bit. But I think being clear with your expectations up front, and I think it's good, like you said, to be clear on which as clear as you can be on which sessions both you and your spouse will be there and not.
Yep.
Because I think especially if at the first one it's just you or whatever this is, like if you're just getting together with them before you actually start kind of discussing what it's going to look like, there are issues that, especially like this is most likely going to be a room with potentially if it's us, the guy with another guy and his fiance, and there's some, I mean, obviously when you talk about sex and things like that, especially if there are issues that maybe they disagree with or have a more a kind of a difficult past with, then it can seem like it has the potential to seem like people are ganging up on you or whatever. So if you're setting it up front of like, hey, I know these discussions, as much as you can, obviously you don't want to lie or make promises you can't keep, but as much as you can tell them, like, hey, my wife will be there for these. And I think it'll, even if there wasn't going to be tension, it can ease like kind of some anxiety going into these conversations to know like, okay, this will be a more even conversation, or at least there'll be someone there who'll make me feel a little bit more comfortable. And especially when it comes down to like, because you've counseled people that they haven't been at the church for 5 years. They're relatively newer to the church. And so knowing that there'll be someone else there that'll make them feel a little more comfortable, I think it'll be helpful.
And the sessions are good too if you use the marriage course, because it's a husband and wife that do it, so you get both perspectives there. And yeah, one of the things I remind my wife of often, I mean, she loves the church, loves our people, but like this is not her job, so she does not need to be there all the time and do all these things. Like, you want to set good boundaries. So,
and I also think it's good if your spouse can't make them to any of them, then to set that expectation up front, so they're not like, is she? Especially in your case, obviously your wife is like very into, very into marriage, like very, very into this kind of thing. That's what she does for a living, and so I think even if you didn't address it, I think there'd be the assumption of people that know you both of like, oh, there's probably going to be both of you, and then to wonder that each week. So even if you can't make any, just set that expectation of, hey, this is just going to be me, and vast majority of people are probably expecting that. Yeah. And so they'll be fine with it, but just making that clear.
Yeah, so this goes with the next point, is that you need to plan within your already decided boundaries. Now, we've talked about this also. You need to have like how many nights a week you're going to be willing to do ministry stuff, breaks, all these sort of things, days off. You need to have, here's what it looks like for me to be healthy, and then you need to plan within those healthy boundaries. And I say that because pre-marriage counseling is a little difficult because you've got two people you're trying to meet with.
Yeah.
And, in this day and age, both of them are often working. So you've got all these schedules that you got to manage, and it would be really easy for you to be like, well, I'll just fit it in. And so there are exceptions that you make, absolutely, but they need to be the exception and not the rule. And so maybe for one of the 5 sessions or the 6 sessions, you make an exception, but that should just be one, and it should not be all of them. And so that comes with like, if you're in a season of life where there's things going on and your spouse can't make any of them, like just be upfront and say that.
Yeah.
Also, like for example, because we had some coming up, we had a bunch coming up. We were going to do 2 sessions at once for one of the couples a couple weeks ago, and they texted me the day before. I was like, "Hey, can we just do one of them?" And I said, "That's fine, but we were going to do 2 sessions, and then we were going to meet one more time." I said, "I only have 2 more times that I can meet with you before your wedding."
Yeah.
And so if we don't do 2 at this time, we're going to be 1 session short, which is fine. Or you can meet with me during the day. Because we're going out of town, wedding stuff. It wasn't going to work out.
Yeah.
And they were like, that's totally fine. He has to take off work early to come meet with me. And that's, it's not a problem at all, but because, they both work, he works during the day, he can't really do that. If they want to get all their sessions in to be healthy, because we've got a lot going on, like, it's just, I'm not going to make all these exceptions. And not that he was asking me to. It was just really, if I didn't have already boundaries set up in place, I would just have to say yes.
Yeah.
And I'm saying this for his good, my good, the church is good. And so you need to plan within your already decided boundaries. And again, this gets difficult when you get multiple schedules and working schedules. You can make exceptions, that's fine, but they have to be the exception. You can't do, 4 nights a week because you've got all this stuff going on.
Mhm.
And this also can help, if someone's getting married, maybe you need to push up the premarital counseling earlier so you can spend more time
Yeah.
between each session or whatever. But you got to decide what your healthy ministry boundaries are and stick to them with stuff like this so that you can be healthy for the long haul.
And this might mean that like you might have to say no to somebody to do it,
Yeah.
which hopefully you'll be able to find a way around it and make it work, because obviously this isn't just like a time to hang out. This is actually important for them. But you can only do what you can do. And so like I know you just did or maybe you're still doing, but I don't, no, I guess it finished. But basically premarital counseling for someone who's like getting married very quickly. Like you're coming up against the deadline. And so you're able to make it work. But like in that case, it I'd hate to say this, but like it may not always work,
Yeah.
because you have to have some. You can't do everything, and you
Yeah.
can't be everything for everybody. So I think you have to, hopefully you'll be able to make it work, and like you said, like actually tell them this is how you kind of need to work it in your schedule, so that maybe they can come in during the day or make it work in that way. But if it comes down to it, it may be a time where you have to say I can't do it, or we have to push it down further, which means we're gonna have to get closer to the wedding, which I don't know. They might be happy with or may not be, but you have to. You can only do so much, and so this isn't like a one-time thing. If you're meeting with them over a number of weeks, that if you say yes up front, you kind of, I think if you say yes, you have the obligation to finish, and so you need to be careful what you say yes to, I guess.
Yep.
Is the moral of the story.
Yep. So set expectations and plan within your already decided boundaries because that'll help you, make sure everything's going in the right direction.
Yep.
Number 4 is to ask questions more than give advice. Again, one of the challenges in ministry is people want to meet with you, and you can have this pressure of feeling like you have to answer all their questions and give them, all their problems.
Yeah.
Which can be pressure filled, especially the younger you are. If you're in a situation that you've never been in before, and we've talked about this previously. One of the more recent episodes, we talk about questions what tips for meeting with people, and so we talk about some of these questions. Asking questions is always the best thing. Like even in premarital counseling, where someone's literally like kind of saying, "Tell me what to do," there can be a lot of pressure there. And so again, I like the premarriage course because they already ask a lot of questions. But the thing here is there are times where it's helpful to say, "Hey, I think you should do this." But I personally try to only do that like maybe 2 or 3 times a session. Really, I just try to ask a lot of questions, steer them in the right direction, but try to figure out what they want, what boundaries do they want to set up, because at the end of the day, they've got to agree to them and they've got to be in a good place. And so I don't know if this encourage you or not, but especially if you're maybe going to do premarital counseling for the first time or just not sure how to do this, that you don't have to answer all their questions. You don't have to have the perfect marriage, although you should have a good marriage. Just remember to asking a lot of questions. And so even for us, like when we go through the sessions, we take some of the questions from the book or some of the questions that we have on our own. And there might be times where they pointedly say, well, tell me what to do here. But I try to limit, like, I'm just going to go ahead and tell them like once or twice. And then at the end of every session, depending on what we talked about, we'll say, hey, do you have any other questions about what we talked about or anything you want to know more? And they might ask 1 or 2 things. But I don't know how helpful this is or not, but just ask a lot of questions and let them try to figure it out. And maybe you can guide them, but don't feel like you have to have all the pressure to tell them all these things what to do. Just ask questions that are relevant to each session.
I think when it comes to giving advice to people or meeting with people, there's people, even if they ask it, that I think giving like concrete do this is way less helpful than actually listening to what they're needing and saying. Now, obviously, there are situations if they're saying something, you're like, look, this is just not going to be healthy for you. That you need to say something. It's not like never say anything. But I remember like when we went through premarital counseling or just talking with younger couples and things, it's the biggest thing is like if both of them are on the same page, they're probably on the right track.
Yeah.
Yes, obviously, if they're both on the same page and it's something that's going to be detrimental to their marriage, different story. But for the most case, at least in my small experience, like the most of the issues have come because husband and wife have been on different pages and have not either discussed the issue or agreed on the issue, whatever it is. And so and that's not a thing that you can like and I don't think the answer to that is you be the tiebreaker of they want to do something one way, they want to do something another way, and you tell them which way is the right way. But it's more so just facilitating conversation and helping them listen to each other and listening to what they're saying and giving feedback when needed. But I think if you're going in saying like that or kind of with the thought process of I'm going to give a bunch of advice or I'm going to tell them that this is the biblical way to do things. There's times for that, sure, but I don't think that's necessarily the the majority of what you need to be doing.
Yeah, one of the most helpful things about premarital counseling is just getting a husband and wife together with a neutral third party and have them talk about stuff that they wouldn't think to talk about until they got into a big blow up fight in the future.
Yeah.
Now, they're still going to get in big blow up fights because
Sure.
that happens.
Yep.
But it's just about getting them on the same page and talking about things and considering things that they might not have talked about. And so your role isn't necessarily to tell them what to do. It's more so to have them talking about stuff that they might not have considered, so that they can begin a conversation. Because even when we have our sessions, like I always tell them, hey, we're not going to. The goal is not to fix this right now. The goal is for you guys to know this is a thing that you might disagree on, and to continue to talk about it into the future, and to know that it's something to work through. Because you can't fix all the. You're not even married yet, so you're not going to fix everything. But it's about just allowing them to start talking about things that they might not have thought about otherwise, and so that's one of the most helpful things.
Yeah. For sure.
So ask more questions, then give advice. And then last but not least, to talk about sex and birth control. Now, let me just explain what I mean. Again, ideally, a man and woman, husband and wife that are doing the premarital counseling are both at this session.
Yeah.
And there's people all over the spectrum for this. You got people that have been sleeping together, and you got people that have never slept together, and they're really trying to honor God. I always assume, even if talking to people that have a sexual past, that they have never really been taught about sex. That's just the best assumption. Especially if they grew up maybe in a conservative Christian home where purity culture was a big thing, and sex was always just viewed as something you just don't do. Like we don't talk about it. They don't know how the body works, or they may have been given a unhealthy view of it. And so we have a very frank conversation of, here's what happens. Here's how this works. Even birth control. Now everyone has different opinions on it. Christine and I have opinions on it. I'm not going to share what our opinions are because that's not relevant for this. But people need to know how it works and what options there are. And so a lot of times, the guy and the girl or both have no idea like what to do about this. And so we don't like be graphic for graphic's sake, but we talk about how the body works and what this looks like and all these sort of things, and to give them a space that they can talk about it with somebody, to have their questions answered. Because a lot of times if you don't know much about it, you feel, I don't know, awkward. You just feel dumb, so you don't ask anything. And obviously sex is an important part of marriage. And so we, again, not trying to be graphic or anything, but like we talk like, hey, I'm not sure how much experience you have with this. Let me just explain to you how all this works. And how orgasms work, and how the male body works, and how the female body works, and healthy boundaries, and communicating with one another. It could be I just say that because it could be like, I'm not and like an elephant in the room of like, hey, just make sure you love each other. But people just, they don't know. And where are you going to go to learn this stuff? I mean, there's not a lot of places to learn. And so I just to say, whenever you get to it, whatever stuff you use, just to be really intentional about it, and to let them ask questions. The guy or the girl might want to ask questions like individually. Like we've had situations where like we were counseling and the girl had questions and she didn't want to ask in front of me, which is totally fine.
Sure.
Like obviously she doesn't care if her fiance knows, but it was weird. And so Christine and her talked at a different time. And so, but just like talk about it, and don't just assume that people know what they're doing. And us also, like in our porn culture, that's unrealistic. And so that can cause a lot of problems because you think it's supposed to work like that and it doesn't. So just be intentional about sex and birth control and all that sort of thing. Whatever your convictions lie on that, share them and just say, hey, here's some things to think through, because where else are they going to go? So
I think so. Thinking back to our pre-marriage counseling, there's one thing that stuck out to it, and it was this like session. I don't remember if it was a whole session or whatever, but I remember thinking, because the one we did it with she was older. She was great. Like everything about it was great. But I remember coming up to this, I was thinking, we grew up in, like you said, like purity culture kind of era or whatever. And she was part of the church that we grew up in. And so I was kind of like, feel like this may be like I was kind of nervous coming up to it of like, I don't know how much he's going to, I don't know, shame for whatever. But like she went so far the opposite, which I thought was equally unhelpful, where she was basically like, we like had a workbook. I don't remember what book, whatever we used, but we had a workbook that we worked through. And when we got to that, she was basically like, told us, talk through this on your own. Like she's like, I don't want to, I think she had a good motivation. She's like, I don't want to necessarily like tell you what's the best thing to do, because it's kind of like what we talked about before. Like it's not always you have to do this one thing, but she was like, and I want you guys to be comfortable, so I want you guys to go through this and talk about it together. Which at the time I was like, okay, I didn't really. We got married really young, so I didn't really think anything of it. But thinking back, and especially thinking about like people that I know now when they get married and stuff like that, I feel like, however much detail you want to get into, but I feel like it is something that actually needs to be talked about.
Yep.
And not something that you can just assume that, hey, if I tell them talk about it, they're going to talk about it. Because, for her, maybe she thought that was best. Maybe she was uncomfortable talking. I don't know what the reason was. But it's something that people need to talk about. It's something that couples need to talk about, especially, really any couples, but especially if they're getting married younger. And so I think it's just something that whether you're comfortable talking about it or not, you need to bite the bullet. And obviously, if you're going to be a pastor, you're going to have to be comfortable talking about it at some point anyways. But I think it's a conversation that needs to be facilitated at least to an extent.
Yep.
Yeah.
So talk about the birds and the bees.
That's right.
And I assume, again, this is our experience, is that people, particularly people that grew up, that have been trying to honor God sexually, they're nervous to ask questions. And so unless you are proactive about it, they're not going to ask anything. And so don't be afraid to talk about it. So those are 5 free, not free. They are free. Everything is always
true.
free.
Yeah.
5 premarital counseling tips. Again, if you have questions, you can join the Facebook group and you can ask them in there and check it out. Again, I use the marriagecourse.com. That's where you can access it by Alpha, do the pre-marriage one. I'm sure the marriage course is good too, but never looked at it.
Yeah.
But that's where you can get it. And no matter what you use, hopefully those other ones are helpful. And thanks for being with us.
Yep.
And we'll be with you next week on Practical Church Planting.